You probably won't hear this on the nightly news, but there's a plethora of research that says marriage is good for you. In fact, much better than singleness or cohabitation. Your finances will be better, your spouse is less likely to cheat, you are less likely to be a victim of domestic violence, and the outcomes for your children's life are substantially better, just to name a few.
But now a study has been released that says marriage isn't just better for you, it's actually better for public health. Andrea Mrozek, Family Program Director of Canada's Cardus think tank, joins us to explain. Hey, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
What does the report tell us, about the link between marriage and health? Because we don't always think of those two going together, do we?
No, and we don't often hear as much about marriage on the positive side as I believe we should. So we've done a solid bit of research here, bringing together over 50 studies from peer-reviewed sources that show that there is a quantifiable and pretty dramatic in instances improvement in your individual physical and mental health, the result of a good marriage. Now, early on in the interview, I want to stress that the marriage has to be a good marriage, a high-quality marriage with good communication and support in place. But where that exists, you see benefits in cancer recovery times and in survival rates for cancer treatments in 5 specific cancers.
Like how
You
much higher
also,
are the rates? How much better of a chance do we have when we're happily married?
Right. So in up to 20% in one study was the result that you had an improved outcome, chances of survival and of getting better. And that was true in esophageal and head and neck cancers, in prostate cancer, and breast cancer. In one instance, one of the researchers actually said that the marriage effect was bigger than chemotherapy, which is, I think, quite a dramatic statement about the nature of marriage. So, yeah, and then that's true also for heart health. So you're more likely to survive a heart attack if you're married and less likely to have a heart attack. Also improved outcomes in psychological stress and mental health and just general welfare. So again, this is true for a good marriage, but it is definitely of public health interest, I think.
I remember reading a quote attached to your press release saying that if marriage were a pill, everybody would be clamoring for it, which is a great quote. You've approached this in a unique way, kind of saying this is a great savings for our scarce public health care resources. Why approach it that way?
So we would like to do a second study to try and quantify what it would mean if we raised the marriage rate. Would we see an improvement in the public health system? But I also believe that when we have this good information in our hands, then we can treat people more effectively. And actually, the takeaways there are for people who are not married. We have in Canada a dwindling marriage rate. Fewer and fewer people are choosing to get married. So you have a lot of people who are without this sort of social support in their lives. So when those folks go to the doctor, they need to be treated with a special level of care and concern. And I think that this is the type of research that would allow people in healthcare to respond effectively to those who may or may not have social supports in their lives. So that is one big takeaway, I think, for public health. Whether this actually saves dollars in the end would be the subject of another study, and a pretty intense one. Or would we end up spending more or needing more volunteers for those people who are not married? That question is one that I'd like to investigate further. But the first step was to really identify that there are some pretty significant health benefits to marriage.
That's actually really cool. Now, I want to kind of differentiate here. Some people think that like cohabitating and marriage they're interchangeable. One doesn't just have a piece of paper. Does that research yield the same results for both situations?
So the body of research that's developed on cohabitation versus marriage has never shown that they're the same thing. So that doesn't hold true for the health effects. You wouldn't see the same health benefits to living together as you would to marriage. There are some improvements that come simply from having a person who cares about you nearby, but cohabitation generally does not have the same effect. And this has been shown in a number of different studies that don't necessarily pertain to health benefits of living together versus marriage. But certainly that remains true when we examine the health benefits I just spoke about. Cohabitation is not quite the same thing. It's not as stable as marriage, even in an age where we do see great instability associated with marriage, so higher divorce rates than I'd like to see. Cohabitation still remains markedly more unstable. Is that a word? It's less stable than marriage.
You know, people kind of talk about now there's a war on marriage, and marriage is under siege in our culture. Not just people not getting married, but staying married and, you know, hitting a rough patch and saying, oh, you know, I'm not happy, so I'm going to leave that marriage. But this is such great news. If this is, you know, if there's such great news out about marriage, why are we hearing more about this?
Well, I don't know, and there could be any number of reasons about that. It's a complicated thing. Certainly, probably goodwill on people's part. You don't want to judge someone if they're not married, and so many of us are single today. But I think that this type of research and information actually helps people in their marriages. We have, I think, in non-abusive marriages, a responsibility to our family and friends to help in rough situations. Every marriage hits rough patches, and there is good help to be had out there for those situations. Research like this shows that it's important to work through the rough patches, that you can improve your marriage and experience benefits from your marriage. In other areas of research, we also know that marriage is a stabilizing force in society and civil society. So there are broad ramifications to a decline in the marriage culture, and I think it's important to get good information out there that's positive for people to grab hold of.
Okay. Well, now that we've heard all this great stuff, what do we do with these findings, in your opinion?
I think I just touched a little bit on that. The notion of helping people in rough patches in their marriage is a private ramification. A more public one would be for public health people, for nurses and doctors to be aware of this as they meet patients who are facing bad diagnosis. Then they'd be able to compensate and offer supports. So that's another takeaway. Will probably take a lot more than one study to have that filter into our already very busy and stressed healthcare system. Nonetheless, this is a start towards looking at that. And if we can examine marriage in public senses, so outside of the home, then when we see a public health benefit, or if there could be improved public health, the result of information like this, the bottom line is most young people say they'd like to get married. That is an aspirational goal of 90+% of young people. So again, if we can have positive information there and help people through their marriages and to stay in their marriages, then I actually think that we're doing a bit of a public service with that.
Yeah, well, Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. We love to bring stories like this out that we're not hearing in the regular news and encourage people to hang in there and keep working on their marriage. Thanks for joining us today.
And thank you for having me.
And listen, if you're watching this program, this is one of the things we love to do here is build into people's marriages. Right. We have teaching, we have testimonies, we have experts, all kinds of things. Actually, if you go to 100huntley.com right now and type in the search engine marriage, I did this last night and I couldn't believe the number of teachings and tips and interviews and stories and like there's a lot there. So if you just need some encouragement today in your marriage or some practical advice, go to the website. We'd love to help you out.
Yeah, and one thing I learned from this is I have a great marriage. I'm so thankful. I need to go home and thank my wife for keeping me healthy.
There you go.
We'll be right back.